textbooks, and so many are just incredibly dry. And Mike's is got all of the information, so much more detail, so much more research than the vast majority of aquarium books out there. The time that you spent on that, Mike, is just incredible. And the work that you put into that, and it's very readable. It's not a slog like so many. It's got all the information of a textbook, but it's also fun to read. So I couldn't recommend anything more. I wish that you could buy it right now. I'd be posting the Amazon link, but I checked yesterday and it's going for over $1,000 on Amazon.
That's just insane.
The sellers ought to send you some of that money.
Yeah, I wish.
But you can currently get it through interlibrary loan at the very least. So highly recommended. So without further ado, Mike, it's all yours. You should have full access to share. And again, folks, if you have questions, the raise your hand feature for live, or throw them into the chat, and I'll do my best to keep up with them.
Well, it's telling me that you disabled my screen sharing.
I didn't disable your screen sharing.
Well, you're the host.
I didn't disable anybody's screen sharing.
It says host disabled participant
I'm just
screen.
going to, if I make you host, I can spotlight you for everybody. I can make you host. I don't know if Charles is slightly different. Of course, you know there'd be something. This has got slightly different features than my university Zoom. Well, Mike, I'm just going to make you host. It says one participant can share. Okay. So you've got share screen and it says it's not allowed?
Share screen is lit up, but when I click it, it says host disabled.
All right, I'm going to make you the host then.
Okay.
I might not be able to mute people then. You will be able to. You can easily click on anybody that's making noise.
But while we're going through, if you can keep an eye on everybody for any questions, any hands raised, please let me know, because I won't be able to see that.
Yeah, I'll do my best to do that. Super. You should have access now.
Okay.
We've got it.
Here we go. All right. So I'll go ahead and get started here. Now, everybody, please understand that I cannot mute you, or I will not be muting you because I'm too busy giving the talk. So please be considerate of everybody else and keep yourself on mute. If you want to raise your hands, please use the little hand icon that Steve was talking about. And then please ask the question through Steve. That way we can kind of keep this in an orderly fashion. So we'll go ahead and get started then. This talk is based on my book, which is starting out with a picture here, since you don't get to see it too often unless you were one of the lucky ones that were able to buy a copy. This is a picture Gary Lang took. I know he spent quite a while just getting the perfect picture. This is kind of an homage to Charles Masters' live foods book that was out back in the 70s. So, except on Charles Masters, the worm feeder actually has freeze-dried worms in it instead of live worms. So Gary went a step further, and he's got live worms in there. So anyway, I like to start out getting my credits out of the way at the beginning. I really need to thank Gary Lang and Charles Harrison for all the close-up shots, all the microscope shots, and everything like that. Those guys did a fantastic job. They took the pictures for the book, and several of their photos are here in my talk. And of course, the rest are my own, but you'll be able to tell which ones are mine pretty easily. So, all right, there we go. So, the first thing I want to kind of pass on to everybody is to when we're talking about live foods, it's kind of like the hobby. You kind of have to find your own way and kind of start doing things, following your own methods. Basically, what I've done in the book and what I'm talking about here tonight are the ways that I've done these live foods over the last 40 some years. They are, when I put the methods together, I think we had Ralph Wilhelm was still alive when I was had started writing the book or thinking about writing the book, and he gave me a copy. He was our club's exchange editor, and he gave me a copy of a book that he had created, which was basically from all the club publications from around the US and Canada that we had received over the years. And he cut out every live food article and put it in this book, and he had it all categorized. And there were so many different methods. For example, just culturing grindle worms. There were over 180 different methods for culturing, and everybody's, of course, was the right way to do it. But basically what I did was as I was writing the book, kind of went through all these different methods, kind of distilled them down, created a step-by-step procedure. And then my 10-year-old nephew was working for me at the time. And so I would give him the step-by-step, and we would see if he could follow it and do it all on his own. And if he was able to do it and it was successful, then it was something we kept. If it wasn't, we kept tweaking it until we got to the point where he was able to do it. So that's kind of where all the methodology comes from here. But I have to say there are as many ways to culture everything as there are people that are doing it. And there are no right or wrong ways of doing it. It's just your own way of doing it. I did have a gentleman one time who had a few too many at the beginning of my talk. When I got to Daphnia, he kind of loudly stood up and said, you know, you're a damn liar. That ain't the way you culture Daphnia. And I said, well, how do you culture them? And he said, well, you get yourself a 300-gallon Rubbermaid horse trough and you set it up in your garage and fill it with water. I said, okay. And he said, then you go out and you find yourself some roadkill, a squirrel or a possum or something like that. And you bring it home and you throw it into that tub and you let it sit for a couple of weeks. And then you put your Daphnia starter in there and your Daphnia will take off. And he's not wrong. That will work. But I did ask him if he was married, and he did point out that he was not married. I said, well, for the rest of us that are married, the way I do it is probably a little bit more reasonable. But again, there are different ways, and that's kind of an extreme example. And just always remember, is whatever works best for you is the way that's going to work. Because if it becomes too difficult for you, you're just going to stop doing it. But you might ask, especially now, we've got several really good fish food manufacturing companies that manufacture some awesome food. There's a lot of research behind it. So why the heck go through all the trouble of culturing live foods? And it's not so much today, but in the last 5 or 10 years, there have been quite a few pet food problems where the manufacturers have bought ingredients from certain third world countries that don't have the quality control, and then they've used those as ingredients in their foods. But if you're culturing your own food, you kind of have control over everything from beginning to end. So it's a safe and secure food source, especially if you got expensive fish. It's a more natural diet for your fish. A lot of times it's exactly the same thing that they're eating in the wild or something very similar to what they're eating in the wild, and the fish immediately recognize it. You might wind up, especially if you're getting a little bit more advanced in the hobby, trying to feed fish that are just really picky, or that might be wild caught and just aren't ready. They don't recognize flakes or pellets or anything like that. And you have to slowly condition them over to those. And while you're doing that, they still need to be eating. So live foods are a great way to feed them. Also, if you're a breeder, live foods a lot of times are triggers for spawning. Now, I have to say that pretty much most cichlids and a lot of the live bears, you can get away without ever feeding them anything but flakes and pellets, and they'll do just fine. But for a lot of the other fish, like this pair of spotfin shiners here, in order to get them into condition for spawning, you need to feed them live foods. And then once the babies are born, or once they hatch, live foods, a lot of times the little critters pass on digestive enzymes and gut bacteria and other things that are essential, but we're not really sure exactly what all those things are. So sometimes you'll get your fry that are growing up, they'll get to be about 2 weeks old, and all of a sudden they'll start dying for no apparent reason. And what it might be is they're just not getting enough these digestive enzymes or enough of the essential gut bacteria. So what I always do is make sure that I'm feeding a variety of live foods, even the small fish. And then the other thing is behavioral enrichment. And if you, especially if you talk to people that work in zoos or public aquariums, that this is a big thing over the last 10 or 15 years. Trying to give the animals that are in captivity some sort of semblance of natural hunting, or stimulates hunting behaviors. And the best way to illustrate it is everybody that keeps Oscars feeds them big pellets. Sometimes they'll feed them frozen foods every once in a while. And occasionally they'll feed them something really awful like baby or young goldfish or something like that. We'll talk more about that later. But that's not what Oscars actually eat in the wild. In the wild, Oscars prey on prawns and things like crabs and crayfish. And if you've ever seen an Oscar hunting in the wild, which I have, it's just an amazing thing to watch them stalking and trying to figure out exactly how to approach their fry or their food. And you can see the same thing in the aquarium. If you drop a 2 or 3 inch crayfish into the tank, even if the Oscar's never had anything but pellets, all of a sudden it's going to know exactly what that thing is. And it's going to spend some time trying to figure out how to get around the pinchers and how exactly to eat it without getting nipped or anything like that. And it may take him 15 or 20 minutes to figure out how to get it, but that is really, really beneficial, because you'll also notice the Oscar really colors up while it's hunting, and afterwards it may also start acting more like an Oscar and less like just a guy that's hanging around in the tank and not really doing anything. As it looks for maybe there's another crayfish in the tank that I missed or something like that. So think about all those kind of things. And then I always like to talk about the containers I like to use. I generally have moved away from containers like these, even though these are all very useful. And I've started using more flat containers, especially this one right here. This is a Gladware lasagna container. And you can get these like 2 or 3 of them for $4 or $5. They have a nice tight snap-on lid, and you can stack them, which is really nice. So you don't take up a lot of space that way. And they work really well for culturing all different kinds of things. But whenever possible, try to recycle the containers and try to use the same types of containers so that they all have the same lids and the same dimensions, so that when you're trying to find another lid for a container, especially after you've washed it once or twice, it gets more and more challenging as you get a bigger and bigger pile of stuff. So make sure that you keep the same types of containers. That way you don't have to go hunting and wasting a lot of time looking for new containers. And then we are talking about foods, so you do need some different tools for preparation. The kitchen's a great place to find different tools, but always make sure that you if you're taking something like a spaghetti spoon or a slotted spoon or something like that from the kitchen, make sure that you replace it with a new one, not just rinse it off and put it back in the kitchen drawer or whatever. Just make sure you get a new one for the kitchen, and then just keep that one for fish. But all different kinds of strainers and mortar and pestle really helps for grinding things up fine. I'll talk more about these worm feeders in a little bit. Flashlights are real helpful. I found that I have this from when I was a kid. It's a numismatist light, and basically it's got a magnifying glass here, and it's got a little scale down here that you can measure, and then just shines the light, makes it easier to see the different critters and stuff. Different kinds of strainers and spoons. Mincers are real handy. All different kinds of basters or droppers and forceps of different sizes and syringes, different things that you can use to feed your fish. And then all kinds of measuring things like measuring spoons, measuring cups. A hydrometer is handy if you're going to be culturing any brackish or marine foods. I've always found that a funnel is a very handy thing to have. And the only times you really miss it is when you've dropped it, it's fallen behind something and you didn't realize it, and you can't find it when you need it. It really makes it easier to transfer things, move things around. And then I found these glass stir rods are really handy too. I use those a lot. And the nice thing about those is that you can be sure that you can completely clean them between cultures so that you don't cross-contaminate any of the cultures. And then the other thing to remember when we're talking about live food cultures, you buy something at an auction or at a meeting or online, when you get it, immediately divide it up. Always start more than one culture, start at least 2 or 3. It may take it a little bit longer to get going, but if you have something happen to that one culture, you won't have to go out and find it again because you'll have a couple other ones. So always have a couple of cultures going. So let's start talking about the little critters. I like to go kind of like from the smallest to the largest. So we're going to start out with Infusoria, which is the easiest thing to culture. It's one of those things that you do not have to keep going all the time. In fact, if you do keep it going all the time, you'll actually wind up with a monoculture. And a lot of times what you wind up with is this little animal here is called a diadema. It's a predator and it eats other microscopic animals. So you got things like rotifers and paramecia, and there's amoeba there, and these little green dots are single cellular algae. But you just got all different kinds of things, different sizes. And then that's the nice thing about Infusoria, because all of the fry are not going to be growing at the same rate. And if you're feeding something that's all, say, the same size as a rotifer, you may have something that needs a smaller type of ciliate for a couple days until it can catch up to eat something like that. So you want to keep a mix there, and the easiest way to do that is to start off fresh Infusoria culture. So the way to do that is to set up one culture every day, and what I do is I usually set them up starting on the day that I start to set the fish up for breeding. So I'll set up one day, one the next day, one the next day, and I'll do that for 7 days. And I'll take water from a healthy tank. It doesn't have to be the same tank that you're working with the fish for breeding, but you want to get water from a healthy tank. I usually try to either siphon the water from right around the sponge filter, or I'll actually take the sponge filter and do a couple of squeezes into the culture jar each day. And that'll put some microscopic life that's already in there, and generally around the filter, you've got different kinds of ciliates and different kinds of rotifers. And those are 2 things that the fish just absolutely go crazy for. So that's kind of helping your culture get off to a good start. And then you want to add something for that's going to decay. And the reason you're doing that is because you're wanting this thing to decay and feed bacteria. And the bacteria is actually going to be what the little predatory microscopic life eats. So we used to use like dried potato cubes or dried turnips, pieces of rice or something like that. I've actually used rice for years, and it works really well. But I was out in Salt Lake City at Bob Allen's place, and Bob was had a little hot plate and some vegetables boiling there in the fish room. It was kind of like, what are you doing? He said, well, I take the vegetables and I'll feed that to some of the fish that are vegetarian, but I use that water to feed my Infusoria. So basically what he's doing is the vegetables are breaking down, and instead of throwing the water that they were boiled in away, he's taking it and using that, let it cool off for a day, and then he feeds that to his Infusoria cultures. And I tried that, and that works really well. So that's something else that you can think of. And then to feed it to the fish, there's a couple of different ways you can do it. The simplest being just taking it and pouring it into the fry tank. When you pour it into your fry tank, you want to make sure that there's enough room for it to go in. For a long time, I used these drip containers. This is an IV bag, and this is made by Kent Marine. I don't know if they make it anymore, but these things are designed to keep the whatever the liquid is dripping very slowly, and you can set it to drip like once every second, once every few seconds, whatever you want to do. But what I discovered over the course of the day was that the stuff that was in suspension in the water would sink to the bottom. And by the end of the day, they would get all the stuff earlier in the day. And by the end of the day, there wasn't much left. And the whole point of this is to feed them all day long. So what I started doing was putting a piece of rigid airline tubing bubbling in there. And that keeps whatever's in the container in suspension all day long. So it's evenly mixed all day long. What I also started doing was adding a little bit of dry food. I used either golden pearls or I really like a product called Celcon from Sarah, and that works really, really well. So I've been using that a lot, mixing that together in the IV bottle or the drip container, and then letting that drip throughout the day. And I call that fry soup. But like I said earlier, you always want to make sure you got enough room for however much water is coming down. Because what's going to happen if you don't is the water will overflow. You'll come home and you'll have a dried patch of green water laying out here with a bunch of fry in it, because the fry are going to follow the current and they're going to swim right out. So you want to make sure there's enough room in there for however much water you're adding. It's a good reason or excuse to do a small water change every day. And then the other thing, if you have a spawn that kind of is a surprise, it's a good idea to take a clump of Java fern or Java moss or Christmas moss or any one of the different kinds of mosses. All of them are just covered with microscopic life, and you just kind of rotate it in and out of the fry tank. Another thing you can do, my friend Charlie Grimes likes to do this, it's called sponge grunge. Or filter squeezins. Basically, you just take a filter from a healthy tank, squeeze it out into a container, and then let the water settle for a little bit. And the brown stuff that's at the bottom, that's the stuff you don't want to use. You want to use this little cloud of stuff that's right over the muck that's on the bottom. And you can just take a baster and go in there and suck that out. And that's all the little critters that are in the are living on the sponge or living near the sponge. And so you can do that for a couple of days if you got a small hatch, and you don't even have to worry about doing Infusoria. But always, whenever possible, you want to let the parents do the work. This is a pair of Publicochromis crebensis bandawari 2. Here's mom. Dad's in the background kind of guarding everything, making sure everything's okay. But here's mom, and I had just put some copepods in the tank. That's what these little white dots are. And she's kind of helping the fry, kind of showing them where to go. And what the females of the different Publicochromis do is actually flash different colors on their bellies, letting the fry know that it's okay to eat right now, or no, it's time to hide. They'll do a different color, and they'll flick their pelvic fins to kind of give them a warning. But whenever you can, let the parents do the work. Then the next thing is vinegar eels, or I like what the Europeans call them, beer eels. These are the only known animal that can not only withstand but thrive in a pH down to 1. You can see Charles has inserted a paramecium into the photo here, so you can see the difference in size. And while some of the larger vinegar eels are bigger than it is, you can see there are younger ones, some baby ones that are in the culture too, and they're smaller than the paramecium. So you're again getting a mix of different sizes to feed your fish. So if you've got different growth rates among some of the fry, they'll all be able to find some food. And what I've started doing, and this works incredibly well, is using a gallon jar, like a pickle jar, with a wide mouth, and fill it halfway with cider vinegar and halfway with water, basically doing a 50-50 mix. Now, you can also go to the grocery store, and in the organic section, you can find unfiltered organic cider vinegar. And a lot of times, if you look in it, it actually has vinegar eels in it already. It's got a culture going. So if you are looking or desperate for a culture, that might be a place that you could find one. Then I've always added a chunk of apple. Just take a slice of apple or taking an apple core and throwing it in the container. And then if you really want them to take off, because you can let them sit for years, literally, and they'll continue living. They won't really reproduce very quickly, except in a minute I'll tell you how to reproduce them quickly. But from when they're just kind of cruising, you can just kind of set it on the shelf and forget about it. But then when you want to get it to take off real quickly, you can add a teaspoon of brown sugar to the mix, or to the water, or the water vinegar mix. And usually within 2 or 3 days, the culture will really start to take off. But I was reading a book called Live Food Cultures for the Ornamental Aquatic Industry. And they were talking about beer eels. And turns out they're these exact same critters. And you can very easily, using that gallon jar and the 50-50 mix, you can get the production, and I'll show you just in a minute how heavy of a production you can get in just a gallon jar. But the first key ingredient after setting up the culture is to add a bottle of beer. And now, Gary, I can, even though you're on mute, I can hear you groaning at me for talking about adding the bottle of beer. So you can buy some cheap beer to use. The vinegar eels don't seem to care. So I don't know about light beer, but you can, anyway, add a bottle of beer. And then don't just add a slice of apple. Get a bruised apple or a beat up apple from the store. Sometimes you can get them for next to nothing because they're just getting ready to throw them out anyway. And just take it, chop it up, and put the whole apple in that gallon jar. And this is the way I'm culturing them now. In the gallon jar, you can see there's a bunch of slices of apple on the bottom. And you just fill it up to right where the widest part is. Vinegar eels don't need a lot of oxygen, but this does give them the optimal surface area in that jar. Now this is that same jar, and this is a bright light behind it. You can see that this culture, which has only been growing for about 3 months, has actually gotten so thick and so dense that you can't see the light bulb behind it. That's how thick this culture is. It's just amazing. And then all you have to do is take a baster and stick it in there and pull out some of the culture media and put it into a wide mouth, tall necked bottle or long necked bottle. And just fill it up to about the bottom of the shoulders, and then take a little filter floss and stick it in there and put some clean water over the top. And what'll happen almost within just a few minutes, they'll start crawling through here. And by the next morning, if you let it set it up like right before you go to bed at night, by the next morning, this will be so dense that you can't even see through it because they're all building up in there. And then you could just take a baster, dip it in there, suck the water out, and then take it, put it into a container of water and go around and feed it to all your fish. The other thing you can do is that once the culture starts getting real dense, around the rim up here, just like with microworms, you'll start getting all kinds of them gathering up on the side of the jar. And I've heard some people will actually float little pieces of plastic in here that won't sink, that gives the worm someplace to crawl up out of the container. And then you can just lift those up and use those to feed the fish or shake them in your container. But when you're going to feed, no matter what food you're feeding, whatever you're going to feed, don't go directly from the culture container to the fish tank, because you can go back into the culture container to feed the next tank, and you might cross-contaminate your culture and wind up losing it. So the next thing to talk about is the microworms, and different kinds of nematodes.
Mike, there was one question about vinegar eels I thought might be good to catch right here. Has anyone used hyperdense?
Yeah, there are
vinegar eels.
There are quite a few people that are talking about that. I've tried that. It does work very well. The thing that I don't like about it is that I'm usually too busy working with the fish, and I don't spend as much time working with my live food cultures as I probably should. And the thing with the vinegar eels is when you got them in a culture jar like that, like I was just showing you, you can literally ignore that for a year or more, and you don't have to do anything until you need it. With with the really dense cultures, just like when you culture microworms and stuff like that I'm going to talk about here, basically you can culture the vinegar eels almost exactly the same way as you're culturing these microworms. But you'll find that they can die off, and they do develop an interesting odor after a while. So it is one of those things you do have to maintain every once in a while. So just there are positives and negatives. This is a picture that Gary set up where you can see these are microworms here, and these are Walter worms. You can see the difference in the dimensions. The Walter worms are a little bit fatter and a little bit shorter. Banana worms reproduce a little bit more quickly. Potato worms, pretty much the same as microworms. Then there's a commercial product called Microworms that has been sold for as long as I've been in the hobby. But all of these things are pretty much cultured in the same way. And you can use some kind of a grain product. I've found finely ground oatmeal works incredibly well. I actually use that as a food for most of my worms now. So I just use it for everything. And the way I grind it up is just I've got an old coffee grinder that I put it in, and I'll just grind it until it's a powder. And I'll grind up a jar of it and then just keep it in the freezer and use it to feed them or as I'm starting my cultures. And it works really, really well. But then the next thing that's important is yeast, because the nematodes don't actually eat the oatmeal. They're eating the yeast, which is eating the oatmeal. So you want to have yeast in there so that they've got something to eat. And then just plain dechlorinated water. And what happens after the culture gets going for a few days is that the surface of the culture just, when you look at shine a little light on it, it looks like it's alive, basically. It'll be moving. And then after a few days, you'll start seeing them climbing the sides like this. And that's the time that you know that it's time you can start harvesting from that culture. And a lot of people worry about dipping their fingers into the medium and getting some of the medium introduced into the tank. It doesn't really hurt anything. You don't really get a lot of it into the container or out of the container into the water. But whenever you're going to feed the fish, the first thing is to come out of this container, wipe your finger, a lot of people use like a watercolor paintbrush or whatever. Whatever you use, just take it and wring it out in a container of water. And then you take that, and from here you take the baster, or you take it, go around and pour it into the tank. And these are young Nessie swordtails, just to give you an idea how small the microworms are. But if you look, they're all different sizes. And the way you get that, if they're climbing just the sides, and if you take them just off the sides, you're going to get mostly males. You'll get females and juveniles that'll be mostly down here on the surface of the media. So you'll get all different sizes, a lot more of all different sizes if you dip a little bit into the media too. And you get a few little pieces of media in the water with them, but it really isn't going to hurt anything. After all, it is food. So it works really, really well. The other thing that you need to keep these going is reset them about every 3 to 4 weeks. You'll notice that they start getting a stronger odor. Some of them will start turning black. If they start turning black, it's pretty much over with. That's why you want to have a couple of different cultures. You pretty much just hit that one with boiling water, just kill it, and pour it down the drain. And then start up new cultures about every 3 weeks or so. So you've always got fresh cultures going. And if you get to the point where you don't really have any smallmouths to feed, a lot of times, and all of us, including me, are guilty of this. We kind of let them go, and then all of a sudden you need them again, and you got to contact a friend because you didn't keep them going because you didn't need them for a while. One of the things that is neat about these nematodes is that you can let the culture dry out, and the media will become completely dry as long as it's not moldy. So as long as it's just a nice, healthy culture that's not got any black spots in it, you can let it dry out. Once it dries out, you can take it and break it up into little pieces. And then you can keep those pieces in the refrigerator in a little container. And you can wait 6 months or a year or whatever. And if you need to start it again, all you need to do is take those and wet them. And in a couple of days, you'll have the nematodes going again. Then you can take them and then just start dividing those little pieces of, I guess you'd call it reconstituted worm media, and put that in 3 or 4 different little culture containers and let them go from there. And within a couple of weeks, they'll be a nice solid culture again. And then we move on to bigger worms. Most of the worms that we use are annelids, the segmented worms, and they actually turn out to be one of the best all-around foods. And they're easy to access. If you need to, you can go out in the backyard and collect them, though you have to be careful about not having used fertilizer or insecticides or anything like that. But they are pretty much everywhere. And they're very easy for fish to digest. In fact, goldfish culturists have always said that if you have a goldfish that appears to be constipated, the best thing to do is to feed it either peas or a couple of earthworms to help it kind of clear itself out. And all fish recognize worms as food. And I've got this picture of a snapping turtle here. You'll notice that its tongue looks like a little worm. And what the snapping turtle does to feed is it pretty much just sits there on the bottom and holds its mouth open, and it just wriggles its tongue around. And fish will come in to investigate thinking it's a worm. And as soon as they come in, bam, he gets them, eats them, and then opens the mouth up and he's ready for the next one again. So all fish recognize them as food. Even marine fish recognize them as food. There are fish in that we call anglerfish that have a little, the first ray of the dorsal fin has a little modification on the end that kind of looks like a worm. And in some of the deeper sea ones, it actually glows. And basically, it's just a little wriggling worm to attract fish to come in. And as they come in, the anglerfish will grab them and eat them. So the one thing that I always hear from people is that, well, you can't feed a lot of worms because worms are full of fat. Well, the truth is that all annelids are the same. They're all about 6 to 8% fat, even white worms. What actually happens is that when you put the worms in the tank, they ball up. And when they ball up, one fish gets to them and eats a whole bunch of them. So what's happening is that one fish is eating more and more worms, so it grows a little bit more than the other fish every day. And over time, it gets big and it gets fat because it's eating a lot, not because the worms are full of fat, because it's eating so darn many worms. So you have to use a worm feeder or spread the worms around the tank in order for that not to happen, because they are 64 to 68% protein by dry weight, which is just a fantastic amount of protein. They're really, really good for conditioning fish. And then you can make them even more nutritive by feeding them good food all the time. So if you want to feed them fish food or use healthy vegetables or something like that, any of those kind of things are really, really good for bulking them up. And then, of course, Gary took this shot, which kind of is a perfect shot to illustrate the fact that even if the worm is bigger than the fish, they can still eat it and get it down without a problem. Worm is something that they are naturally attracted to, again, and they can eat a big worm as long as they can get it in their mouth to start out with. It may take them a little while, but they can do it. We'll talk a little bit about breeding annelids because they pretty much all spawn the same way. All of the worms, all the annelids have a little clitellum here. That's actually their reproductive organ, that little bump that you see on them. And all of the annelids are egg-laying hermaphrodites. And both animals are male and both animals are female. And they'll kind of wrestle when they get ready to mate. And they line up clitellum to clitellum, head to head. And they'll actually exchange the one that's kind of won the wrestling match gets to fertilize the eggs in the other one. kind of takes the role of the male, and the subdominant one will be the female. And then the clitella will actually kind of roll off the body and slide off the body. And when it does, it forms a little egg case. And depending on the species, there'll be anywhere from 1 to as many as 7 or 8 eggs in here. And you can see these particular ones have 2 eggs in them. But when they hatch, the little worms that come out, generally, this is pretty indicative of all of the little worms. When they come out, they're all white. So a lot of times I'll hear somebody talking about, oh, I've got white worms in my red worm culture. I don't know how they got there. Well, those aren't white worms. They're actually baby red worms. And then the other worms that we're familiar with, the other annelids, cubifex and black worms, are aquatic worms. And they reproduce primarily by segmentation, which means they kind of break apart and each segment will grow into a new worm. They do reproduce sexually as well, but not as often. So we'll kind of go from size small to size large again. The grindle worms are the way to start. If you're a normal hobbyist, you probably do your worms, grindle worms like this, using a worm bedding media. I like to use magic worm bedding. This is a culture that's not too old, only a few days old. But this is a time when I was feeding dog kibbles to the culture and was getting pretty good hatch rates and pretty good production. But when I switched over to using powdered oatmeal, that's worked a whole lot better, and my production's really taken off. If you're a killie hobbyist, this is the way you do them. I don't know why, but all killie hobbyists seem to like to use the green scrubby pads and have their culture going on top. But and then the other way is to do like filter pads, and then you put a piece of nylon, plastic canvas, and you'll put a piece of that over the top. And the reason for that is to keep the worms out of the mesh and staying up near the top. And then you've got enough water in there that the bottom pad is kind of soaking wet, and then the other pad just kind of pulls water from that. But what I've found is that this is the best way for me. And this, you can see the underside of the plastic on any one of these three. You want to put a piece of plastic over it, helps hold the moisture in. And then you'll see the worms sometimes lay some eggs on there. There's young worms here, there's older worms. And you can just literally go in there and just take your finger and scrape them off, or use a scraper, or if you're really squeamish, just take a baster and lift the plastic off and then hold it over another container and squirt some water down on top, squirt them in the water, and then take that baster, go around and feed them to your fish. Or you can just use your fingers, and because they are just worms, so whatever's more comfortable for you. The reason that I don't like using the pad methods is that I found that over time, I tend to, when I go travel or get away for a couple of days, I always forget about resetting one of these cultures before I leave, and they dry out. So what happens is this culture, the worms just go down deeper into the culture media, and then you start feeding them again. When you come back, they come back up to the surface. So that's why I prefer this method over the others. And also, this particular method especially has an interesting smell to it if you don't keep the water perfectly clean. And now, one of the benefits of that is you can use the water for Infusoria. One of the drawbacks to that is everybody in the house can smell it. So sometimes when I was using this method, I would open the container up, and within a couple of minutes, Angela would be upstairs, and she would be yelling down, "Are you feeding the fish?" Because she could smell, kind of giving me the hint that it stinks. So I kind of moved away from that, and I culture them all on soil now, just because it works best for me. But like I said, a lot of folks, especially the killie guys, like to use the scrubby pad method. And then grindle worms are about 3/8 to 1/2 inch. White worms, there's a couple of different species, and they can be from about 1 inch to about 1.25 inches or so long. There's 2 different kinds of white worms that are circulating around the hobby right now. And for years, I raised the cool version. This is a wine fridge here. And basically, again, it's magic worm bedding on the bottom. And then I would actually take a piece of bread, just plain old white bread, soak it in water where I dissolved some yeast and got it all nice and soggy. And then take that, lift up this plastic lid, put the piece of bread in there, put the plastic lid back on it. And the worms are just within literally 15, 20 minutes of me putting it in there, the worms would just be all over it. And within a half an hour or so, you'd see basically just a little piece of bread left here and a pile of worms. This is Gary's photo here, but kind of gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. And then from these two containers, I just rotate. One day I'd use this one, the next day I'd use this one. And I, at that time, had about 50 tanks in the fish room. And I was able to feed every tank from just these two containers, just rotating them every day. So you can get production going really, really well in these containers. And then a few years ago, Pat brought some worms, white worms, that an older hobbyist had donated to him and distributed them to some of us. And we're calling them the warm white worms because they don't need to be refrigerated. They don't need to be kept cool. You can just keep the container sitting on the floor in the basement, and that's cool enough. And other than that, it's pretty much the same thing. And the reason I took this picture is because you can see all over the surface of the media here, all those little white dots, those are all eggs. So that's how productive this culture, this was just getting started. But you can see this piece of bread's only been in there for about 8 or 10 minutes, and they're just starting to come up and start eating it now. But they just literally just devour it within a few hours. And while your culture is getting started, the first week or two especially, just use a half a piece of bread, and then don't start putting bigger pieces in until that half a piece of bread disappears pretty quickly. And then black worms, and again, just to give you an idea how they kind of ball up when you put them in the tank. And that's why we use the worm feeders. So the worms will just kind of wiggle their way out. And instead of one fish going down and getting this whole ball of worms, each fish will have to work at it and pick the little worms as they come out. And to keep them, you don't really, because they reproduce by segmentation, it's kind of impractical to get them to reproduce in quantity where we can get enough worms to feed a fish room. They don't reproduce as quickly as some of the terrestrial worms do. So what we do is we just buy those from worm farmers that grow them a lot more quickly. And these little blue plastic tubs, these were really popular for a long time. I used a bunch of them. Basically, you just put the worms in here, and you put just enough worms to cover the whole container here. This will hold about 6 to 8 ounces of worms. And then you just put enough water that it'll fill this bottom part, and it'll just cover the worms. And then stick it in the refrigerator. And then every day you take it out, and this the screened part here, the mesh part, actually comes out, and you can run that under cold water and rinse it, and just change out the water in the container. And it's a real quick, easy way if you're not doing a whole lot of worms. I'm at the point now where I'm bringing in 20 to 30 pounds of worms a month, and I needed a better way to do it. So I started using, remember that plastic lasagna container I talked about? That'll hold up to a pound of worms in it. And basically you put the worms in there and you cover them with just enough water so that you can see the water right over the top of them, but no more. And then you keep them in the fridge and change it every day. I just pour them through a real fine mesh net and rinse them under cold water. And in the summertime, the cold water coming out of the tap is not cold enough. So I keep a gallon jug of water in the fridge and use that, and then just make sure I refill it every day so I can rinse them. And then after you rinse them, then you can feed them to your fish. I do not dechlorinate the water that I keep them in, and I do not dechlorinate the water that I rinse them in. And I've been doing this for 26, 27 years now, and I've never had a problem with it. And we have chloramine in our water here, so it does not seem to bother them. Then, especially if any of you were in the Boy Scouts, or if you get fishing magazines, you've seen ads for Uncle Jim's worm farm. And the particular species that he has is a kind of a narrow, mid-sized red worm. It's Icenia andreae, and they get to be about 3.5 inches long. And they culture pretty much the same way, magic worm bedding. And then again, I feed them with bread soaked in yeast water. And you can see them just all coming up here. And if you look closely, you can see eggs. You can also see the white worms, the baby earthworms, all over the place. So again, that's not white worms that appeared in your culture. Those are actually baby red worms. And with the red worms, they're big enough you can just pick them out by hand. And once a year, you want to change the media. And the way you do that is by moving the magic worm bedding from one side of the container, or not the magic worm bedding, but the food on the magic worm bedding from one side of the container all the way to the end. And all the worms over a couple days will move over to and follow the food. And once they're all over on that side, you can take half of the magic worm bedding out, put it in the garden, replace it with fresh magic worm bedding, and then move the bread to the other side, and then pull the other half out and do the same thing the next week. But don't throw that substrate away, because that is full of worm poop, or as they call it, worm castings, which you pay a lot of money for in the garden center. So you can use that in your gardens or in your potted plants. So you don't want to throw that away. Then we've got some of the little Daphnia and Moena, and even Ceria Daphnia. Basically, we're getting into higher protein, and the fats that are in them are good, nutritious fats. A lot of people say that they're not really worthwhile as a food, but they really are a great live food. Biggest thing is you don't want to use raw water. You want to use used water from a tank. I like to use water from a tank that's a harder water tank, like a Tanganyika tank or a Malawi tank, and add a handful of crushed coral to the container. And again, make sure you set up several tubs. And when you first get it, drip acclimate it to your water, because if it's a sudden change in water in pH or in hardness, a lot of times they'll all die. And then I've always talked up this secret food mix. It's real, it's in the book. It's a really, really nice mix, but I've found something that works even better. I've been using this, basically it's like a liquid gel type food. It's liquid algae from Brine Shrimp Direct. And it's they have several different sizes, and what I found works best is the smaller size, the Nanochloropsis. And you take a few drops, mix it in with dechlorinated tap water, and feed it to the Daphnia. Just pour it in there, and do that every day, and they just go crazy. It's almost as good as just feeding them pure green water. It's just fantastic. Then you want to stir it in or store it in the refrigerator, and they just go to town on this stuff. But it is a little bit expensive, so you might want to start off with the small container first. But even the small container, it needs to be shipped overnight, so it stays cold, and it is kind of expensive with shipping. But again, you can't beat it. It's just incredible. And of course, we moved to brine shrimp, which is one of those things that it's been ubiquitous in the hobby for about 65 years now. And because of that, there are all kinds of myths that have kind of occurred or grown with the hobby over the years. And the first one is that, and I see this repeated a lot online, that they're just like potato chips. They taste really good to the fish, but there's no nutritive value in them. And as you can see, they're 60% protein and 18% HUFA fats. So very, very good, very, very nutritive. I've also heard from some people that they're really hard to culture. They're really easy to hatch. It's a little bit more challenging to raise them, but they're not really difficult, what I would call difficult to culture. And especially since most of us just feed baby brine. It's really, really easy to do. And the other thing I hear just all the time is that, oh, if you get the brine shrimp and they don't clean them properly when they harvest them, you'll get hydra mixed in with them. The water where they come from does not have hydra in it. Hydra don't live in hypersaline environments where the brine shrimp live. Usually where the hydra are, there are some bacteria, there are some single-celled algae, there are brine shrimp, and then there are brine flies, and that's about it. There are no hydra in the water. So the reason you get hydra is because hydra eat baby brine shrimp, and they can hide because they can make themselves really, really tiny, and until all of a sudden there's food around, and then they can start feeding real heavily, and then they start reproducing very quickly, and you'll get a culture of hydra very quickly in your tank if they're there. But they didn't come from the brine shrimp. They're just eating the brine shrimp. They were already in your tank. And a couple of rules for a better hatch. Store your eggs in the freezer. Don't leave them sitting out in the fish room. It's just a few extra steps, or even walking upstairs or whatever. But you'll be surprised how much longer they'll last and how much better a hatch you'll get if you keep in the freezer. Also, add a drop of bleach when you set up the mix. It keeps the worms or the eggs from clumping up, and keeps bacteria from growing in there for a day or so. And that bacteria that starts growing in there competes with the brine shrimp for oxygen. So you start getting a poorer hatch, or the ones that do hatch start dying. It's important to harvest them after just 24 hours because if you wait too long, you'll see in just a minute why. But if you wait too long, they start losing their nutritive value. And 78 to 80 degrees is about optimal for getting the optimal hatch in 18 to 24 hours. Like I said, feed them to your fish quickly. If you, for some reason, can't harvest them anyway, store them in a small container in the refrigerator and add a HUFA supplement, something like Celcon or something like that, to the water. That'll help fortify them. The brine shrimp won't eat it. It's actually sticky, and they get covered in it. And then they'll transfer that HUFA supplement to the fish when you do feed them to them. And the biggest thing is salt and Epsom salts are really cheap. There's no reason ever to reuse your water. The water after the first hatch, the first day, is full of bacteria, and those bacteria are going to be competing with the next batch of eggs, and your hatch rate's going to go down 50 to 60% with the first time you do it. The second time, it's going to go down even further. There's just no reason. Brine shrimp eggs are so expensive, and salt and Epsom salts are so cheap. There's just no reason to reuse it, so don't do it. And then just to give you a quick idea, this is an egg that was just added to the water. After an hour, it's kind of rehydrated. When it hatches, you can see that the hatchlings are just full of highly unsaturated fatty acids. That's all the good nutritious food value. After about 12 hours, they look like this. They don't have a nutritive or as big a nutritive value. They do still have some, but not much. But they can't eat anything, so there's no point. A lot of people talk about feeding them. There's no point in feeding them. You don't feed them until after they've molted the first time. This is one that's molted. Now you can see it's got a mouth, it's got a digestive system, its gut's full of food. And now at this point, they need to eat. The problem is it's also almost twice as big as the first instar. So it may be too big for some of your fish to eat. And here's a paramecium Charles inserted into the picture just to kind of give you an idea of the size that we're talking about. And then amphipods, we're kind of running out of time, so I'll kind of skip over those because a lot of people, for some reason, there's an ick factor with these. A lot of people don't want to culture them. I don't really understand why, but I'll skip over that.
Mike, we did have a question about brine shrimp.
Okay.
One question was back to when you were talking about storing them. He's asked freezer or fridge or both.
Freezer.
And yes, he says, also you said bleach, question mark. And I got to say, I started doing that a little while back, either on yours or Gary's or Charles's recommendation. And one thing it did is it stopped me from getting, I have one that drains from the bottom and it stopped it from clogging.
Yeah, well, that's that whole thing about them clumping up together. They don't do that. And what happens is a lot of the unhatched eggs, because there's always going to be a certain percentage of unhatched eggs, and those will just form little clumps. And like you said, they will kind of block up the bottom, or they'll if you use a siphon, they'll kind of clog up the siphon and make it difficult to harvest them. So
sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Well, I was going to say,
questions.
Yeah, and the bleach kind of takes care of that.
Yeah. How much salt should you add?
I do a 2-liter bottle of water, and to that I add 2 tablespoons of salt and 1 tablespoon of Epsom salt. And some places you'll also need to add baking soda to the water. Other places you don't need to add it. I don't need to add it to my water here, and I found that's the optimum hatching mix. And then again, adding a drop or 2 of bleach to it.
And I got weights, I think, from Charles. I measured out one time 100 grams of, I just used non-iodized Morton salt.
Yeah.
And that seems to work well for a gallon, 100 grams for a gallon. And then I labeled an old prescription fill jar where I filled that up with. So now I just fill it up and that seems to work. The last question is, do you notice a difference between table salt and marine salt?
Marine salt, yeah, it's a heck of a lot more expensive. So, table salt is cheap, and the brine shrimp don't seem to care. They're only in it for 18 to 24 hours, so it doesn't really make a big difference. Actually, iodized salt doesn't hurt them, and they do not absorb enough iodine. Iodine is a necessary element for the brain and the development of the nervous system for young fish anyway, and they aren't in it long enough to absorb enough that it'd be harmful.
Okay, so, I did not know that, so iodine's just fine. And then Charles had made a bit of a response to that. He's suggesting a hydrometer. Is the specific gravity recommended? Offhand, I think it's 1.0118.
Yeah, well, actually, that's a little low. Actually, the point, what is it, 0.28 to 0.30, because the water that they're in is actually hypersaline. But I found that 2 liters, 2 tablespoons of salt, and a tablespoon of Epsom salt, and that works just fine. And I haven't gotten around to measuring weights or anything like that, but I get to the point where if it works, I just keep doing it.
Sounds good. Thanks, Mike.
Okay. I'll talk about a couple other things that you can use that are a little bit bigger here because we're running out of time. Cherry shrimp. And I hear a bunch of you already just groaning and yelling, no, you can't do that. But cherry shrimp, when they first came in, we had a gentleman in the club that was a discus guy, and he ordered a dozen of them from me. And at that time, they cost wholesale almost $10 a piece, which is unbelievable now, but we didn't know that much about them at the time. And he got them and he took them home and added them. He added this huge, beautiful Planet tank, and it was just discus in there. And he thought the shrimp would be something cool to add to it. And within about 10 minutes, his couple $100 worth of shrimp disappeared down the stomachs of the discus. So it was a very expensive live food and good lesson that they do for small to medium-sized fish. They're excellent live food. And I've found just almost any fish that can find a young cherry shrimp will eat it. And you can just set up a 10-gallon tank with a mop of or a pile of hornwood or something like that in there, and just a lighted tank and feed spirulina flake food, and they'll just go crazy in there. And really high protein and good fats. Flower beetles, I'll skip over those guys again because, like I said, we're almost out of time here. one food that I have found recently that works really, really well are these mini mealworms that have been coming in for the herp hobby. It's a different species. These are the common mealworms here. They get to be 1.25 inches or so long sometimes. But these guys stay at about 1/2 inch long. And they're really easy to culture. All you need is oatmeal. They don't even climb out as adults. So you can just have them in a plastic shoebox or a plastic lasagna tub and put a layer of oatmeal in there and then add a piece of apple or a couple of carrot slices every few days and just change them out. Really, really easy to culture. But I found a lot of the bigger killies, a lot of our native fish, a lot of cichlids, and half-beaks, and some of the bigger libraries just go crazy for these things and do really, really well on them. So I found them to be a very, very useful live food. And then mosquitoes, of course, if you're in St. Louis or St. Charles County, you can't culture them. But if you've got a neighbor that you really don't like, put a couple of containers of water over along their property line away from people, and then add a little bit of milk to the water. And the female mosquitoes will come in because that milk will start going sour, and they'll come in and lay their eggs. And then every 7 days, you want to make sure that you're harvesting and just pouring everything into a real fine mesh net. And then you can take them and either feed them to the fish or you can freeze them, put them in a Ziploc bag and freeze them. And the cool thing about freezing them is that when you thaw them out in a couple months or whatever, most of them come back to life. And so you've got a live food that you can use in the wintertime. So they work really well. And the nice thing about collecting them is that you're actually taking a bunch of them out of the breeding population for the neighborhood. So you'll actually be controlling them. Great live food, but again, St. Louis County, St. Charles County, you can't do that because it's illegal. And then a few other ideas for bigger fish. The cockroaches are just amazing. I mean, look at that, 71% protein, 8% fats, and it's a good fats. For smaller fish, you can feed the little nymphs. For larger ones, you can feed the adults. If you start seeing ones, they're flightless, but they do have a flight morph. So if you do start seeing them, you've got something going wrong in your culture, and you need to make sure that you get them out of the culture. Otherwise, they will disperse. And they don't live for very long because they need to be kept really warm. Like I'm talking like 85, 90 degrees. But if one of these gets out into the house, you're going to hear about it for the first couple hours until it dies. So it's a really good idea to make sure that if you see any of the wing morphs, that you don't let them escape. And then all different kinds of fruits and vegetables. You can feed just a mix. Fish will eat those. They'll eat pieces of pumpkin, different kinds of squash and stuff like that. And then, of course, we're lucky here in Missouri. We've got a bunch of different crayfish species. As long as you're not taking one of the endangered species and you have a fishing license, you can collect your own and feed them to the tank. But once you take it out of the body of water, do not put it back into any body of water because even a native Missouri crayfish in a different stream can become an invasive species. So you don't want that to happen. Just take them home and feed them to your fish. And the last thing I'll talk about is why not to use goldfish, feeder goldfish. The first thing is because they contain thiominase. And what thiominase does is it leads to a buildup in the body because it can't be processed. And it leads to B1 deficiency. And another thing that we've noticed is the things that eat it become more aggressive, that have a buildup of thiominase. They become more aggressive. But they also have memory loss and they die younger. Some of the people that feeder goldfish think that it's really cool because the fish get more aggressive. And that's kind of what they're looking for. But at the same time, over time, it's going to be not a good thing for the fish. And for a lot of the narrower bodied predatory fish, the skulls of goldfish are unusually large compared to their body. And if most predators can digest them, but if they eat a bunch of them at one time, they can get compaction in the body or in the digestive system, and they can actually get a blockage. And the other thing is that they introduce disease. And we had a gentleman that was a teacher, a science teacher, and he would always, one of the advanced classes at the beginning of the year, they do a lab. He'd get a dozen feeder goldfish from the local pet store and then have everybody look for a pathogen on it. And in the group, generally he would have each group that was in that class would find something different, a different kind of pathogen or parasite on all of the feeder goldfish. So just something to think about before you feed them to your prized red tail or whatever. Feed them a processed fish instead. So, all right, Steve.
So we did have another question. Thank you so
Yes.
much, Mike. And Jesse, you need to clarify. You said which method or culture is the least smelliest? Were you referring to everything or a specific culture?
Yes, I was just talking about everything in general. Which of these, if I was to try one of these things that he's listed, which would be the least smelliest?
Well, the one that you maintain.
Okay.
Basically, all of them are just fine. You don't have a problem with them smelling unless you don't maintain them properly or you let them go too long before subculturing them. And then at that point, you'll wind up with something that somebody in another part of the house will ask you for feeding the fish. So you've got to just maintain them and they'll generally be fine.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say the thing that I've had get the smelliest are neglected fruit fly cultures.
Oh yeah.
And it might just be, I know, Mike, you've recommended using a culture media like a store-bought.
Yeah, with the fruit flies, definitely. I found that yeah, it costs a little bit more, but over the long term, it lasts a lot longer and it doesn't smell. So using the Carolina Biological Supply media or something like that, it works so much better. Or now Josh's Frogs, you can get media from them too.
I've been using Ed Millinger's recipe, or at least the recipe that I got from him, which is mostly mashed potato flakes, yeast, a little bit of sugar, a little bit of apple cider vinegar. It has some fantastic cultures, but yeah, they do stink after about a month.
Yeah.
They've got to be cleaned out. Yeah,
definitely. Commercial culture media has a little bit of an advantage there.
I'm curious for Gary recently posted an experiment that he did with they were microworms, right, Gary? Not banana worms. Anyway, I think they were microworms, and I've been using mashed potato flakes.
They were banana worms, but it works the same for microworms too.
They did a lot better on ground oatmeal, just as Mike was suggesting.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. That's why I switched to it a while ago. The guy on Live Foods did the experiment completely wrong, and so he came up with saying, they would look the same, but his experiment, he did it badly. The worms were crawling all over the lid and everything. That when the worms crawl on the lid, the culture is about to go explosive, because yeast will go anaerobic and aerobic, and they were giving off something toxic. Those worms are trying to get out of Dodge City.
Yeah,
so that was what I wondered, is what makes the worms crawl? That's the question I want to pursue. Is it antagonistic or otherwise? Your comment that it was mostly males crawling, I found interesting.
Yeah, in a healthy culture, but once it gets to the point where Gary's talking about, where things are starting to get anoxic in the media, everything is trying to crawl out of there, and you'll see that they're not only just like a half inch or so up, but they're completely covering the sides and the top of the container.
So in a healthy culture, what makes the worms crawl?
It's just there's not enough space. Your culture is getting too dense. So that's the point where you want to start harvesting. So and I got the idea for using oatmeal actually from Charles Masters mentions it in his book, and I've noticed a lot of people use just plain oatmeal. They don't actually grind it up. I started grinding it up, and it works better for me. But there was also a publication put out by the U.S. Department of Agriculture trying to figure out what worked best for culturing the foods, because they were talking about using them as an initial food for game fish that they were raising. And they had to find out which was best. And they found out that the ones actually fed on a wheat pablum type food grew the quickest and were the most nutritious. Second most available or most nutritious was the ones grown on oatmeal. But wheat germ or wheat pablum or any of that kind of stuff is a little bit harder to find without different chemicals in it. So
and the very first stuff I used was pablum baby cereal,
Yeah,
but that
yeah.
smelled worse than
Yeah.
that was the worst smelling.
that
Then
does
the
get
oatmeal was the next worst smelling. So is that because because the worms are eating the yeast, but does then the yeast have different nutritional value based on what it's growing in?
Yes, that's what winds up happening according to the Department of Agriculture study.
Okay. Different amino acid combinations, etc.
Yeah.
I was going to add, as somebody relatively new to keeping live foods, I've just really been doing it over the last couple of years, aside from baby brine shrimp. Grindelworms, I was talking with Mike about this earlier, have been the real standout for me in that they're just so easy to maintain. The culture media lasts so long for me.
And do you do the wet or the soil method?
I do wet. I'm using, not wet, I guess it's I use Zoom at Eco Earth.
Oh,
And
okay.
I've
Yeah.
been feeding mine the bug bites, the pleco sticks, which seem to disappear completely, whereas some of the other foods I tried got pretty gross. But I every now and then I take some out of one of the old cultures and start a new one, and that just works really easily. Put a piece of plastic over the top. So
Yep.
it's a great one for slightly larger fish. So I raise a lot of apistos, and once they get past the microworm stage, which isn't long, it's a really nice mixed food. And they'll eat anything. They'll eat crushed flakes, but they really like those.
Yeah, you get a lot better growth feeding them live foods.
Absolutely, it seems
And
that
a lot
way.
quicker growth.
Yeah.
Steve, you'll get a lot better growth if you do the water method, but you might get divorced also. That makes
the way
Yeah.
that it's working, it kind of, as Mike said, you know, if it's working for you, don't change it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
the water, those worms when they go bad, they make the microworms when they go bad smell like sweet perfume. It's worse than anything.
I've had a Grindelworm culture going for about a year now, and every now and then I take out about half of it to start new culture. But it's still, you know, I'm not sticking my nose right in it, but I don't notice anything when I open it up.
Yeah, when it goes bad, you'll know it.
When it goes bad, I'll know it, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's the water culture that I'm talking about. The water culture is just so foul. I've never smelled anything worse.
Any other questions from the audience?
Hi,
Charles,
good
you're
evening.
muted.
Have anyone done Moina?
Mm-hmm. What's your question about it?
I'm trying the spirulina and yeast mix and it keeps crashing. Is there a way to improve on feeding them?
Moina seems to do better on green water, or like I talked about, that liquid algae mix. For some reason, they do not seem to do as well with the dry mix of food as Daphnia do. So they really do well on a green water mix.
Suggestions on how to get green water then?
Well,
way to culture green water.
I can pretty much culture when I don't want it to go in a tank. I'll have a tank turn green, but I've not had much luck intentionally trying to grow it.
Okay.
But a lot of people that have will take like a quart-sized jar and put it on a windowsill, fill it with aquarium water, and squeeze a little bit from the filter in there, and then have a quart-sized jar sitting on the windowsill. And I've done that a couple of times and had pretty good luck, you know, getting it over a week or so. but keeping it going, I just have not had very much luck with it.
So, Mike, is it worthwhile to invest in that the liquid algae mix from Brine Shrimp Direct?
I swear by it now. I use it, and I really have been pleased with it.
I got
So,
some too on your recommendation. Yeah, and it stores in the fridge for quite a while.
Yeah, I've just been so happy with that I've pretty much stopped using the dry mix altogether.
But you will, as Mike mentioned earlier, you'll have to pay, a good amount for shipping.
Yeah.
But you get it shipped well and fast. So
Yeah, the Brine Shrimp Direct knows what they're doing.
You just go buy 25 kilos of brine shrimp at the same time, like I'm doing next week once the FedEx gets their crap together. And that way you could buy it real cheap. It's only, maybe $1 a pound of shipping that way.
Yeah.
Charles, what, were you going to say something?
Oh, am I on? Yeah,
You
I
are.
was going to go back to the Grendel worms. We had a visitor from North Carolina who started his cultures and kept his cultures with kitten chow.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been using kitten chow for a long time. It doesn't have as much oil in it as most of the other kinds of food. And it really doesn't make the culture foul. It's one of the least smelly of them. And it's done us very well. So that's probably around 10, maybe 12 years ago. I started using kitten chow as the food for the Grendel worms. And spray it with a little water once in a while. But most of the cultures have remained for me for a number of 6 to 9 months anyway, and then change them over as they slowly mature, move the dirt from one end to the other.
Yeah. Well, like I said at the beginning, everybody's got their own method, and it's the right method for them. So
As long as it makes me tons of Grendel worms, I'm happy.
Yeah, that's what you want.
Right.
Well, I think that's all the questions.
I have one more, sir.
Absolutely.
Can you gut load microworms, or they only feed on yeast?
Oh no, you can gut load them. Actually, if you remember that picture that I had when I started talking about the microworms, where I was showing the difference between the Walter worms and the microworms, Gary took that picture, and he actually fed the Walter worms a astaxanthin powder first, so that they would have, if you looked at them, they had little red dots in them, which was the astaxanthin powder moving through their bodies. So yes, you can gut load them. It's not as easy to do as it is with some of the other bigger worms, because the nematodes primarily feast on the different yeast, but you still can do it.
Okay, thank you. Can you also
Mhm.
use spirulina powder to gut load them? And how long, when you now feed them, can it be used to feed the fry or fishes?
Usually the food moves through them. It moves through them pretty quickly, so it's probably less than a day. So I would feed them like in the morning, and then that afternoon or evening feed them to your fish.
All you have to do is put it in the center of the bowl. If it's green spirulina or the red astaxanthin, by 24 hours, they'll be crawling up the sides, and your sides will be orange or green. I think for a great Christmas card, would be able to take green ones and red ones and mix them together. That would be a fishy Christmas card.
There you go.
Okay, thank you. And last question, have any of you all tried the hyperdense vinegar eels culturing, which is similar to microworms culturing?
That's what Mike is doing.
Yeah, I have tried it. The only thing that I had against it was that it's something that needs to be maintained, whereas the vinegar eels, the way I'm culturing them, I can literally ignore them for 6 months or a year and not have to do anything, and still have a really dense culture going.
When you mean by maintain them, is it the same way as you do microworms? You culture every month or month and a half once it starts to foul?
Well, when you're doing them like the microworms, yes, you have to subculture them every 3 weeks to a month or so. But when you're doing them in the vinegar, the way I maintain them long term, you don't really have to do anything.
Okay, thank you.
Mike,
Yes, Jake.
I was gonna say I have had quite a bit of luck with green water. Sorry, I'm
Mhm.
balancing 2 babies and feeding them. In
Not
the
green water.
yeah, the key for me, the key for keeping the green water going has been adding a ton of nitrates. So I put in fish food or fertilizer, or like a liquid plant fertilizer, things like that. And that it's like neon green right now. So it does really well with a lot of nitrates and other nutrients like that, just excess nutrients.
Yeah, I see a lot in the literature. They always talk about adding ammonium nitrate, but that's not exactly easy to get. So
It's
woo! I just had
probably not a
huge
cost-effective way, but I've been playing around with a macroalgae tank, saltwater, and dosing it with Brightwell's nitrate and phosphate products, as well as an iron and one aim specifically at macroalgae, the micronutrients. Growing dragon's breath quite well.
So you mentioned that the cultures don't get very smelly if you maintain them properly. But what would you consider, like, besides vinegar eels, which vinegar eels seems to be pretty low maintenance, are there any other foods that are pretty low maintenance that you can leave?
Any of them you can probably go away for a couple of days, but if you're getting more than a week or so without checking on them, most of them, aside from vinegar eels, start to have problems.
Okay.
I would say, Kevin, I've personally found the grindle worms, keeping them in soil. I've gone away. We haven't traveled much during the pandemic, but I've gone away for a week at a time.
Yeah.
I feed them before I leave, and I feed them as soon as I get back. Normally, they go through. I'm keeping them in a Cool Whip container. Is my main group, and they go through about half a dozen Plecobite sticks a day.
Wow.
I'm getting a lot out of there, and they just keep going. I've got a couple smaller cultures going just as backups, but
kitten chow would be a whole lot cheaper.
Well, I don't have a kitten, but Charles, I'm absolutely game to try that.
I know neither.
Pleco
I've
bug
got
bites,
dogs,
bug bites aren't free, are they?
Me.
All
A
right.
couple other live foods that you can probably walk away from for a while, a week or so. Once you get a fruit fly culture started, those will go for 3 or 4 weeks. You can leave them before they start going bad. And then the same thing with some of the small flower beetles, like the sawtooth flower beetles and the confused flower beetles, red flower beetles. That's one that you can also leave going for 6 months or a year and then come back to it. And as long as it's got an exposure to humid air, it's fine.
Well, Mike, thank you very, very much for your talk. Thanks so much for stepping in at the last minute.
Yeah.
It's probably
Thank
the
you,
third
Mike.
time I've seen the live food talk, and I'm continuing to learn new things.
Well, I've learned some new things tonight too. So there you go.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good evening, folks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mike. That was awesome.
Mike, if you haven't had a chance to read the chat, you've got a lot of nice feedback there.
Oh, good.
With
No, I hadn't.
with the Zoom plus the YouTube, we had about 80 people on.
Oh,
We
great.
had about 20 people on YouTube here.
Fantastic. Yeah, I saw we peaked on band at 63, I think. I'm not band, sorry, Zoom. Crossing
I was
over
like, what?
my platforms, yeah.
And I see Roday's still on there. If you're still there, Roday, I'll try to get in touch with you next week and talk to you a little bit about the Limia project.
Sounds good.
I've already been in touch with
Thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate you guys. Sorry I couldn't make it. I will hopefully be up and back at them soon.
We
Awesome.
appreciate you, Justin. So
It's
glad
good to
you
hear
could
from
make
you,
it.
Justin.
Thank you.
And you're not getting out of the
You're in
talk that
Justin's
easy. You still
CO2
want to
talk.
hear it.
All
Look
the
forward to hearing
time.
Justin's CO2 talk here, hopefully in the near
I
future.
know.
Yes.
And I've already been in touch with Rodette. Hopefully get him sometime later this year.
Awesome.
Have a great night, everybody.
Okay. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Have a good one.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Steve.
All right, everyone on YouTube, thank you guys for joining. I hope you guys enjoy. Yeah, I will catch you guys in the next one. Say bye. Bye, Peanut. All right, good night, Joe.